Well, thank you all for taking the time to join today for our College and Career Readiness Forum of Unlocking Career Success with Durable Skills. Just as a reminder, if you're able to, we'd appreciate if you could keep your video on if you're able to. Obviously, active participation. You feel free to unmute yourself, use the chat box, raise your hand as we move along. And just as a reminder, we will share out a feedback survey, the recording, slides, and additional resources afterwards as a follow-up. And so for those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Burns-Hawley, and I am the College and Career Pathways Coordinator with a focus on special populations and social emotional learning. I'm part of GSN's I-76 Collaborative, carrying out most of my work in the northeastern part of the state with the privilege of serving several of our rural districts out there. I was a former middle school teacher, taught language arts for 10 years, a lot of expertise and implementation with instruction, curriculum development, design, MTSS, leadership coaching, you name it. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys today. And I just want to welcome you. If you could take a moment to put your name, school district, organization, and title in the chat, and then let us know if you are currently utilizing any curriculum to assess durable skills. That would be helpful for us to know. So I'll give you guys a minute to do that while we get settled in. All right, while you guys are finishing up adding your info to the chat, our learning targets for today are going to be to gain knowledge on North Star Skills Framework, and then understanding skill components and competencies, assessing those skills, and then incorporating them into instruction. And before we really dive in, I just wanted to take a minute to kind of center us around the connection of these particular skills as it pertains to college and career readiness as a whole. And so coming directly from CDE and their post-secondary workforce readiness of career development, I just wanted to share a couple of things with you to kind of ground us, as I said, as we move forward before we dive in here. So effective career readiness activities provide students with an opportunity to explore their individual talents and interests, and they can help students understand how those interests intersect with the needs of the labor market. These activities can also equip students with critical opportunities to enhance their skill and earn industry-recognized credentials to improve employability. And labor market alignment ensures that education programs prepare learners for the skills and competencies needed in today's workforce. So with that being said, what are employers saying? We've heard that there's a big mismatch between skills students graduate with and skills that local employers want. And there's been a major decline in skilled workers entering the local workforce as a whole all across the state, which is probably not news to most of you guys. So as a solution, GSN has kind of positioned ourselves to kind of be that intermediary that bridges the gap between education and employment to improve the skill set by seeking out input from businesses and community to identify the most critical skills needed by students when entering the workforce. So on our journey to kind of figuring this out and bridging that gap, we have developed what are called North Star skills. And so what are North Star skills? They are simply just durable skills that are most needed to ensure the next generation is prepared for the workforce and life after high school as a whole. So the who that is involved in the development of these skills are businesses, community members, and educators with the guidance of GSN, of course, that come together to kind of collaborate surrounding the skills that are most needed in the local workforce regarding those respective communities or regions, and just used as a North Star to kind of navigate the pathway success for students to create a stronger pipeline for those local employers. And then so addressing the why are we doing this? And that is to address and assess career skills and competencies that align with graduate portraits to ensure students are successful after high school, as I said earlier. And then we have created a student-centered reporting solution to kind of help teachers guide instruction and be able to assess students, as well as data track and progress monitor as well. So before we really dive in here and before I turn it over to Marzano's research team, I wanted to throw a Jamboard into the chat for you guys real quick. And I wanted to just kind of set a purpose for our learning because we want to know exactly what you guys want to get out of this. So I'm going to put this link in the chat here for you. And then if you could utilize the sticky note function and just type one or two things in terms of what you guys want to know about the topic today. All right, there's one. So I'm interested in hearing what a variety of districts have done around North Star skills. Better portrait of graduate into action. Curious about how the soft skills are measured and if the measurements are uniform across classrooms. I'm open to anything that can help me help my students become successful adults. Absolutely. All right, I'll check back just in case. But pushing forward, I'd like to formally welcome and introduce Marzano's research team, Catlin, David, and Rachel, who are here today, and they are going to present surrounding these durable or North Star skills, as we call them. So we're excited to hear from you guys. I will let them introduce themselves, and then they can take it away.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'll start off. My name is David Janowski. I'm a researcher at Marzano Research, and I'm located in the Denver area. So this is work that that is very interesting to me. I've been leading this project with Marzano Research to support GSN's work around North Star skills. Have Catlin go next, and then Rachel.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catlin Scott. I'm a director at Marzano Research, and I'm here supporting David and his team. We've been really excited to work on the North Star skills and just really applaud you all's deep interest in making sure that students have the skills they need to be successful adults, and that these skills are, the things that really match what you and your communities think is important. I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Schwartzbard. I'm a research associate with Marzano Research, and I joined this project in a late summer, early fall, focusing on developing the rubrics and sample assessments for these North Star skills. Prior to joining Marzano, I worked as a teacher at the middle and high school level, and it's really exciting to me to see these skills getting brought into classrooms.
All right. So I'll go ahead and get started and share the work that we've been doing for GSN. That's sort of our goal today. So our focus has been, how do we assess and measure these North Star skills? And in order to do that, we have to first start by figuring out exactly what they are. So what we're going to focus on today is, one, how we use the literature to define the North Star skills. We're going to share the scales and rubrics that we developed for GSN, and then talk a little bit about a portion of the rubrics, the sample assessment side of things. And you'll get some more detail on that as we go. So we'll first want to start off by thinking about, how did we define the North Star skills? GSN has asked us over the course of the last year and a half to define 10 different skills, the ones that are there on your screen. There are obviously a lot more things that we could focus on, but this is where we've started this particular work. And in order to do that, in order to develop a definition, we spent a lot of time looking at a lot of articles. So we started this work off by doing a literature scan, looking at scholarly literature, various SEL and other frameworks, different articles. In some cases, we looked at some websites and things like that. But in general, we tried to focus on the scholarly literature. Over the course of defining those 10 different North Star skills, we've looked at over 1,000 different sources, different articles, and then included in our final analysis 548 of them. So we spent a pretty good amount of time with the literature to try to really figure out how we could define these particular skills. once we narrowed that down and we figured out we have these 548 different articles to read, our job then is to figure out what are they telling us? How do we use all of this to come up with a consistent definition for these North Star skills? So we started off with Portrait of a Graduate by Battelle for Kids in order to develop that initial understanding. And as a team, we spent a little bit of time just talking and discussing and trying to figure out what was contained within that. But if you know that document, it's really, I mean, it's 2 or 3 sentences. And so we needed to go a lot deeper than that. And so we went back to the literature and went through an extensive coding process. And really what we were looking for is in the literature, how does the literature define these particular skills? And what are the component parts and pieces that make up each of these skills? Our job was to figure out what are the measurable components that we can break each of these into. And so through that, we were looking for the key components and the competencies, and I'll define those here in just a second. But the point I want to make is that the work that we did was embedded in the literature that we consulted. We were looking overall to find, this consistent definition in the literature. So here's an example of one of the definitions that we came up with. This happens to be for the North Star skill of collaboration. At the very top is a very, very simple basic definition. That's not particularly useful. What is useful are the key components and the competencies. Basically, what we did was we broke this skill of collaboration into 4 major subcomponents: communication, team-created solutions, providing and receiving peer feedback, and interpersonal skills. And again, this is what the literature was telling us as we looked at all of it. And then each of those was broken down further into competencies that we can measure. And so when we're looking at defining and measuring the North Star skills, what we're doing is thinking about measuring at the competency level. And what does it look like at each one of those levels? So you will find in the documents that Amanda will share with you that we've done this work for every single one of the North Star skills. Our next step then was to figure out, okay, how are we going to measure this? How are we going to assess this stuff? And so we wrote it up as a series of rubrics or scales, and started off by identifying learning outcomes for grade bands for each of the competencies and components. We created learning outcomes for 3 different grade bands: upper elementary, middle, and high school. And in general, those learning outcomes for each one of those are differentiated by the context. So for example, context is defined as where the skill is demonstrated. So for example, at upper elementary in general, you'll find that most of these skills can be demonstrated in the classroom. At middle school, we're starting to think a little bit broader, and maybe there's club opportunities where students could do this, or maybe some career development activities, some things that are happening outside of the classroom. Whereas at high school, now we can start thinking about much more extensive career development activities, maybe job sites, internships, those types of things. So we're looking at these learning outcomes differentiated by context, depending on what's appropriate for each of the grade bands. Then we thought about the degree of support that was necessary. Upper elementary is going to require much more teacher support. And as we move up to high school, at that point in time, we would expect students to be functioning independently at that point. And then finally, we looked at content complexity. How can we increase the expectation, the content expectation for students as they move up the grade bands? And in some cases, this might be defined as some of the literature we looked at, or you could use with students. It could also be, the way the student demonstrates it is going to be much more complex at the high school level than it would be at the upper elementary level. So we wrote learning outcomes for every single one of the North Star skills based on this information, and then developed a very simple scale to assess it. This scale is very simple. 0 is not yet observed. We haven't had an opportunity as teachers to see whether or not students have can do this yet. One, not yet mastered. They're still in progress. They haven't made it. They're not there yet. Two, near mastery, and three, mastered. You'll find as you look at the rubrics that all of the learning outcomes are written at the mastery level. So this is where a student should end up at the end of any instruction that you're doing. So very simple scale. You put all that together and you get this document. So a couple of things to keep in mind. So in this case, this happens to be an example for middle school critical thinking. The key component that we're assessing in this particular rubric is the component of creativity, knowing that there's a creative component related to critical thinking. One of the things that has been particularly challenging about organizing all this stuff is something like creativity. That's actually a North Star skill in itself. But there is a component of creativity that is critical to critical thinking. And so when we wrote this component for creativity, we had to think specifically, what does creativity look like when a student is engaging in critical thinking? So, you know, the overlap between all these North Star skills, you know, presents a particular challenge. You'll see the scale across the top here. And then down the sides, this happens to be two specific competencies related to creativity. And our learning outcomes are in this column here. Finally, you'll see what I think is probably the most critical piece and most meaningful and impactful piece of this document is the sample assessment opportunities. And we're going to talk about those in just a second. But what those are designed to do is give you an idea of how this particular learning outcome could be addressed in a classroom. And we were very, very mindful of trying to figure out a way to integrate it into regular classroom practice or to integrate it within the career development opportunities that you're offering students or could be offering students. We were very, very mindful of not trying to create something that was a new thing that needs to be layered on top. The goal here was to integrate this into normal everyday classroom instruction. So let's talk a little bit about those sample assessments. All the rubrics contain multiple examples of possible assessment activities. They're not assessment items. They're not something you would put on a test, but rather an activity, a discussion, something you could potentially observe a student doing in the classroom. And I can't stress enough that these are written as samples. They're written as possibilities. They're written as examples of what it could be, not what it must be. We know that all of your schools are different. All of your schools have different curriculum, different literature. And so whenever we include examples, literature examples, for example, we really were mindful of we want you to pay close attention that this is something that it might be, not what it must be. In general, we did our best to try to create assessments that are grade and level appropriate. You happen to have within the team here, Catlin is our elementary specialist. I taught middle school for 15 years, so middle school was sort of where I spent most of my effort. Rachel was our high school expert looking at this. And so we were really trying hard to make sure that the content and the context, all those things I talked about earlier, were appropriate for each grade level. In addition, we spent a lot of time searching grade level appropriate literature. As you look through these documents, you'll see lots of examples of different stories or reading that a student can do. And we tried to make sure to the extent possible that those were all grade and level appropriate. We also tried to tie these to activities and lessons that you might already be doing in the classroom or your teachers might already be doing in the classroom. The idea here is that you could take one of these assessments and use it for at least 3 different purposes. So you're using this assessment to gather some data on student learning, and you could use it for a formative assessment of content. So it could be about the content that you're teaching. One of the examples I'll show you here in just a second, they're social studies examples. So you could use it for content. You could use the same activity and use it for instructional feedback purposes. And then you could also use that same set of data to gather information as to what a student knows and is able to do related to these North Star skills. So the goal here was to create a set of assessments that could be used for multiple purposes so that we're not asking teachers to do something brand new and different and layer on top of everything that they already are doing. We also tried to put in lots of examples where it is integrated into workplace and career development activities. So whether it be internships, some of these could be used in jobs that the student has. It could be used in after-school clubs. There are some cases in which we know that GSN has implemented in some schools specific curriculum, like entrepreneurship curriculum or problem-solving curriculum. There's coding clubs, different things like that. So we try to incorporate as many examples of that into all of these as we could. So the goal here was to give you an idea of how we could assess these things in a multitude of different activities, but again, integrated into what is already happening in the classroom, not something that needs to be done in addition to. Okay, so here is one example. This happens to be a high school example. And these happen to be different things that might be happening in the classroom. So for example, this is empathy. And so some small group discussions, some small group activities, community or workplace issues, things that might come up on the course of regular everyday stuff, role-playing conflicts. So all of these happen to be more things that might happen in the course of conversations around SEL skills. But there's also lots of things in here that are discussion questions to go with a story that was read in the classroom. We included links or examples of some video clips that could be shown for a variety of different things. There's just a ton of different assessment opportunities that we have built in here. So what we'd like to do, this was just a quick high-level overview of this document, this series of documents, because there's lots of them here. If you think about it, it's 10 North Star skills across 3 different grade bands. There's 3 to 4 high-level components for each one of those skills. So there's lots of rubrics contained within all of this stuff. But what we'd like to do is just break up into a couple small groups here and just have a little bit of conversation about how could you use these documents and integrate it into what's going on already in your school. Share some best practices. What has worked with you for your school to think about integrating this type of assessment into your everyday. And then more, I think the big picture here is what shifts in thinking do we need to work with on our teachers in order to make this integration possible? How do we help our teachers figure out how best to put this in? So I think we're going to break up into a couple of small groups and we will join those groups and just let's talk to each other.
Yep. Okay. Give me just a second and I will get you guys into groups. I'm also going to, let me throw a note catcher in the chat here real quick so you guys can capture your thoughts. And I'll get you into those groups.
While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I can. And there's my contact information in case anyone cares. And I assume Amanda is going to try to get the other group to finish up and join us so we can wrap up.
All right. I think we're all back.
I just want to wrap up my portion here by saying, as GSN shares these materials with you, if you have any questions or wonderings, you're more than welcome to reach out. My email address is up on the screen, and I would be happy to have a conversation with you and help you figure out what these things are and how you might be able to use them. We put a lot of work into it and really would love to see you all work using these to start assessing these skills. All right. So I'm going to be quiet now, Amanda, and let
All
you.
right. Thank you. Anybody want to share anything from their from the groups? There's some great collaboration and chat going on. Pull up the note catcher. How can we integrate instruction and assessment of North Star skills into daily instruction? Anything for the betterment of the group to share on that? I'm just pulling up the note catcher here.
I can begin to address that because that's obviously
Okay.
a monstrous question.
Yes.
That in some cases would require some major systemic change. But I think one of the things that's critical to integrating this assessment into regular instruction is getting teachers to understand that assessment is all about gathering a piece of data.
Mhm.
And if we can use that piece of data for multiple purposes, the same piece of data can be used to measure content knowledge, can be used to measure procedural knowledge, can be used for instructional feedback purposes, and can also at the exact same time be used to measure the North Star skills. And so really making sure that we understand that assessment is about collecting data and that data can be used for multiple purposes, I think is a really critical first step here. The minute we expand our definition of assessment in the classroom, all of a sudden trying to use it for multiple purposes makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. Absolutely. And then I'm seeing here on the note catcher for what has worked, which I heard a group really diving into is the real world scenarios and making sure we bring those real world problems into the classroom, which is part of the work that I am engrossed in with our school district. So that's definitely something that I'm able to speak to in regards to incorporating those skills with those real world problems. And then what shifts in thinking do we need to encourage to make this integration possible? And we hear this all the time, buy-in from staff. That's probably the number one thing. And I really appreciate David, really kind of honing in on the fact that these assessments and the samples that you're going to see on the rubric, it's not meant to add anything extra onto a teacher's plate. It's there, it's ready to go, it'll slide in seamlessly. These are things that your teachers or you guys are already doing. So it's just a matter of being more intentional about it and just kind of recognizing them and pointing them out. But yeah, it's stuff that you guys are already doing, and it's not meant to burden you with anything extra. So that's what I really love about it, and it just kind of slides in seamlessly to what's already going on in the classrooms.
Our group also talked a little bit about maybe communicating with other teachers sort of on a high level about that very issue, that you can take the things that you're already doing and make those lessons relevant to local issues, to problem solving, to career development in a way that relates to the North Star skills. So that kind of big picture piece may help people understand and get that buy-in that you all are talking about as well.
And, I again, I'm going to stress this again. We wrote these as samples. And so if you look at this, you could use these to start a conversation about, these are the things I'm already doing. This is how it aligns to this. And so we can adapt or adopt these sample assessments in order to do that. But I think it's just a matter, I think these are designed to start a conversation and to really build on what's already happening in the classroom.
And you guys really came from an equitable standpoint too. And so with my work in special populations, you know, these can be used with students with disabilities, you know, students who are on IEPs. So there's no worry there, you know, and you can obviously tailor it and make it fit to accommodate, you know, their specific needs as well. But yeah, that's another piece that I wanted to mention too. All right. I'm gonna share my screen once more as we wrap up here. Let me get back to okay. And so how can GSN support growth of these skills? And some of these we've already kind of talked about. But number one, you know, professional development on implementation and utilization of the student-centered reporting dashboard. So, you know, we're able to come in to your schools, or we could do it via Zoom too, and, you know, guide you and your staff on how to successfully implement these and make it fit your needs as a district. And give you access to our dashboard, which we're building out so that you can go in and actually data track and progress monitor. And it's a really easy system to utilize. So again, no extra work other than just plugging in that scale, that 0, 1, 2, 3 scale that David had mentioned earlier that you're using to assess the students with. And then, of course, that goes along with sharing the rubrics and assessments designed by Marzano's team here. And then I also want to mention that, you know, we have SEL units that complement these North Star skills. So on the rubrics, we actually have those units linked at the bottom as an additional resource too, for teachers to access. So that's huge as well. So if there comes a time where you're like, you know, this isn't really going to work for my class in terms of the sample assessments, we have additional resources that you can utilize as well. And then consistent communication with industry and business. So, you know, doing our part and always staying up to date with the latest labor markets and trends, and really understanding what employers, what their greatest needs are. So that way, teachers in the classroom can communicate those things, or I should say admin can communicate those things with their teachers in the classroom, so that they are, you know, kind of tailoring and designing instruction according to what the labor market trends are saying at that time. They're always changing. And then lastly, intentionally designing work-based learning opportunities for students. So that's really a big one for us, especially in our CCR division of the work that we do with those real-world problem scenarios. So one of the things that we really do is kind of outreach and connect businesses with schools and bring in actual real-world problems that local businesses are having in that community, bringing those into classrooms and having students problem solve using those critical thinking skills, those problem solving skills, collaborating amongst each other as a team to come up with a solution to present to these businesses. Also, we facilitate remote guest speakers and facility tours, internships, apprenticeships, job shadows, volunteer opportunities, and then career and education pathway exploration. So just a couple of things that we do on our end. And again, these rubrics are a great way to assess students on these things here. And then resources and offerings. If there is a specific skill that you would like to trial, so say critical thinking was one that you know is a high need in your school, you could put your request in the chat, or you guys can email me, and I'm happy to send over those preliminary resources to you for you to play around with and kind of trial them out. And then obviously, if you're really interested in getting the ball rolling on implementing the North Star skill assessments and utilizing our dashboard, our director of college and career readiness, Elliot Zetas, is kind of the expert there. So I included his information, but obviously you could also ping me too, and I'm happy to get the ball rolling on that. And then for those career connected learning opportunities that I just mentioned on the previous slide, if you want any of those brought into the classroom, we're happy to do that for you guys as well. So any questions that we can answer before we hop off of here? Any comments? Anything at all for the betterment of the group?
This is related to what you just said then, but just checking if I understand. What's the plan for what you're doing here, which I can see you've done amazing work here. So I can hear what you said, the dashboard and all this stuff, but how is this rolling out into the future, into the broader global community? Like, when will we see this stuff out there as a thing that people can go, oh, I want to do that? Do you know what I mean? Like, when is it past the preliminary stage?
I'm going to defer to Marzano's team on that.
Well, I think I would say, I'll jump in. David, you can jump in later. I would say that the sort of Word version is out there and GSN has that. That's fully usable. I know that the app is still being worked on. And I also know, of course, all these things that you've been hearing GSN offer, these are great services. And I think contacting Amanda about those are things that are ready to go. I'll pass to David, and then you should probably flip back to Amanda as well.
Thank you.
I agree. In terms of, we're not doing any further development at this point on the 10 North Star skills that we've already done. So I think those are ready to start being used, depending on, what form or function and degree of participation with GSN.
Yeah, they're absolutely right. Thank you for chiming in on that. So with those 10 skills that they had mentioned, that work is done. That work is ready to be rolled out. The rubrics and the assessments are all ready to be delivered, again, depending on the partnership or the relationship that the district or school has with GSN. And so I'm happy to connect those dots for you in a further conversation, if that makes sense for you, Julie.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, if there's a particular skill that you're interested in just kind of playing around with further and trialing it, I'm happy to send that your way. But I will be sending out additional resources along with the slide deck and the recording and all that. So you will get some information as a follow-up in about a day or two. So
just very quickly, as I said to David earlier, number one, I'm in Australia. And number two, I'm looking at doing a slight career pivot into becoming a well-being consultant in schools generally, rather than at one school. So I'm looking into this sort of stuff to include in what I offer schools in designing well-being packages for them. So this is why I'm here, because I love what you do. So I'm in Australia. Yeah, so I can reach out to you and have more conversations on that, but this is amazing. Thank you.
awesome. Yeah, Julie, for sure. I'd love to have a further discussion with you about that. Awesome. Anything else before we conclude? All right. Thank you guys so much for your time, your participation and engagement today. Of course, a special thanks to Marzano's research team for providing their expertise and kind of guiding us along the way with these North Star skills. And then we have a feedback survey, and actually I'll just put that in the follow-up email for you guys with the resources and information that we talked about today. And if you don't mind taking a quick minute to fill out that feedback survey, we would greatly appreciate your input. All right, that is all we have. Thank you guys for joining us. I hope you have a great evening and a great rest of the week.